essentially only a couple of tools in Photoshop for cropping images, and they are the crop tool and the marquee tool, which I'm sure at some stage you've stumbled across or used. Each of which are fairly self-explanatory, so in this video I'm just going to give a brief overview of how they actually work. So if you're already familiar with these tools, please feel free to jump to the next tutorial. Now the crop tool is located in the tools menu, a few icons down from the top. Now if you want to use the keyboard shortcut, you can press C on your keyboard in order to bring up the crop tool also. Now you'll notice in the actual options bar at the top here, you have a couple of different options. You have the width, the height, and the resolution. So this is essentially where you'll come to actually input values specific to the size that you actually want to crop your image to. So you don't have to go about and actually utilize these. So if I wanted to, I could go straight ahead and actually crop my image however I want, and the resulting dimensions of the image would be specific to the actual current sizing and actual resolution of the image. But if I wanted a specific size, what I could actually do is go back up to the width here and say I would like, say, 36 inch, so I'll put in 36, and then I'll put in my actual measurement unit, which will be inches, so that's IN. If you want to do millimeters, you put mm, or you can do centimeters, which is cm. So fairly straightforward. So I'm going to put inches, and for the height I'm going to put 12 inches. So that should give me a panoramic image. Now for the resolution, you can input 300 pixels per inch, something around that vicinity. So I'm going to do that. You do have the option to switch between pixels per inch or pixels per centimeter. I recommend you leave it to pixels per inch, otherwise you can get quite confused and your image can end up essentially quite large in size, because there is a big difference between pixels per inch and pixels per centimeter. So once I've actually input those values, then what I need to do is actually just go ahead and actually crop the image. So by dragging the mouse across the image, then I get my actual cropping mask. So what I can do now is just position that accordingly. So I'm going to bring it down slightly to get the horizon slightly higher in the frame. And up the top, you have a couple of different options for this cropping mask. You have the actual crop guide overlay, which at the moment is currently set to rule of thirds, which can actually be very useful, especially if you sort of understand the rule of thirds in terms of composition. Now you also have some other options here like grid. I personally don't like the grid. I find it a little bit distracting over the image that I'm actually trying to crop. And you also have the option of just turning them off and just having none. So I might just put rule of thirds back on. Then from here, we actually have the color and opacity. Now the color is actually referencing the areas that are actually outside of the crop that I'm actually performing. So here and down the bottom here are actually black. And the opacity is actually the setting the transparency of that area that is not actually being cropped. So for example, if I just increase that to 100%, you'll notice that this is black and this is black. So you can actually change that color if you wanted to, just by clicking on color and then changing the color using the color picker. But in most cases you don't really need to. Probably the only thing you really need to play around with is just the opacity. Around 60 to 75% is probably a good place to start, where you can just see the actual image underneath your the areas that aren't currently being cropped. So from there, all that I need to do is actually go ahead and press enter on the keyboard essentially, and then that will crop my image. So now if I go up to image and we just go take a look at image size, you'll notice now that if I just change it from centimeters to inches, that I have a 36 by 12 inch image at 300 pixels per inch. So it's performed my crop, and on top of that, it's actually interpolated my image and actually set it to the specific size that I actually entered into those input fields. So that's essentially the crop tool. So now let's go back in my history states. We'll go back to the opened view, and let's actually take a look at the marquee tool. Now you've probably seen this previously in some of the selection videos, but the marquee tool does a very similar job to the crop tool, where you can actually create a selection and then you'll actually crop based on that selection. Up the top, you have a couple of different options up here, from creating a new selection, which you can actually do here, And then you've got actually adding to a selection. So if I click on that, then I can actually add an additional selection to this. So you can end up with some interesting shapes. And then I can actually choose to subtract from a selection. So if I want to remove what I just did there, I can actually just drag over it and that'll remove it. And then I can also do intersects, where two selections intersect, then it'll actually just utilize the intersection area of the actual selection, as you can see there. So it's removed everything else except for the areas that intersected with those two selections. So from that perspective, the Marquee tool is actually quite neat. You have some options here for actually setting feathering, which can be very useful. And then you also have some options here for actually setting the style of your Marquee tool. So you'll notice here you can use the normal setting, which is basically whatever you choose to actually crop your image at. It's not specific to anything. It's just relative to the size and the format that you actually drag and create a selection with. Whereas if you were to utilize the fixed ratio, what you can actually do is input a ratio value. So for example, if I was to do the same panoramic type of crop, what I could do is put a 3:1 ratio, which is that panoramic size. And then essentially by just basically dragging across the image, that keeps that format or the aspect ratio relative to my selection. So then it's just a matter of just repositioning that accordingly. So that also is quite neat. But when you also actually go ahead and actually make a selection using the Marquee tool with a fixed ratio, it will actually, when you perform the crop, it'll actually retain the original size of your image based on your existing dimensions and resolution, whereas the crop tool actually set the size specific. Now, you do have the option with the Marquee tool to come back to style and actually set a fixed size. So what I'm going to first do is I'm going to just deselect what I've actually selected already. And then you can actually input the size that I had before, which was 36 inches by 12 inches in size. And then just a matter of actually dragging your selection over your image. Now you'll notice that that is not specific to my format. And that's primarily because my image isn't actually 36 inches long. So it's not going to actually interpolate my image to 36 inches in size. So if I was just to quickly go and actually crop that, what you'll find is if I go image now, is that I'll actually have an image that's actually smaller than that. It's gone to 12 inches being the height here, and it's only gone to 26.7 inches. So it's not going to actually do any interpolation, and it's not going to keep that format, unless of course my image was actually sized specifically larger. So if I just go back a couple of states, we'll undo that. Let's go back to image, and we'll go image size, and we'll just quickly change this to say 36 inches. Whoops. Yeah, that's right. And then from there, what we can do is just fit back to screen, and we'll go back to our Marquee tool, and we'll use the fixed size again, and just by clicking on it, it automatically creates that format based on that size. So now I'm just repositioning it using the actual arrow keys on the keyboard. And then if I go ahead and actually choose to crop it, it'll crop it. And if we check the image size again, now it should be specific to 36 by 12 inches. So that's the big difference with these two tools, is that the crop tool will actually interpolate up in size if your image is too small to the size you actually want to actually crop to, whereas the Marquee tool won't actually do that if the crop size you're cropping to is larger than that of the resolution or dimensions of the image you're actually working on. So as you can see, both of these tools are relatively easy to use and share some very close similarities in how they actually work and perform, which makes cropping images a pleasure.